Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Monday, November 8th, 2021. And as always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the Start Here link in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of that book contains a narrative description of the primary tool in this work. That tool is known as the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 17 years to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships. And a tool that I can use to turn any negative emotional experience into part of the infallible guidance system that each one of us has been given. You can also download a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one where people have been stepped through that worksheet process or given powerful testimonials about how the use of that tool has improved their life. And if you listen to those on a regular basis, they can serve as a tutorial. You can also go to your app store and type in the 3 words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness and get access to a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet, an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and a copy of the Dragon Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do that soon and often because it frequently leads to comments, questions, testimonials, etc. And if you have any of those comments, questions, or testimonials, we encourage you to give us a call at 563-999-3581. If you call that number and press 1, it will put a little question mark by your phone number, and I'll announce you by your area code. We can have a conversation. We're also doing the Course in Miracles workbook lessons this year, and today is the 312th day of the year, and so today's lesson simply reads, I see all things as I would have them be. The commentary reads, perception follows judgment. Having judged, we therefore see what we would look upon. For sight can merely serve to offer us what we would have. It is impossible to overlook what we would see and fail to see what we have chosen to behold. How surely, therefore, must the real world come to greet the holy sight of anybody who takes the Holy Spirit's purpose as his or her goal for seeing. They cannot fail to look upon what the Christ mind would have them see, and they would then share Christ's love for what they look upon. I have no purpose for today except to look upon a liberated world. That world will be set free of all judgments I have made. Creator, this is your will for us today, therefore it must be our goal as well. So, that's the lesson from the workbook. Here is the Course in Miracles experiment from Pam Grout, lesson 312, a liberated world, she calls it. She quotes Nikos Kazantzakis as saying, By believing passionately in that which does not yet exist, we create it. Pam writes, who in their right mind buys a pizza, eats one slice, and then throws the rest into the trash can? Yet, that is what I often do with my time. I throw away precious hours of my day in mindfulness, in judgment, and instead of being fully present, fully enjoying my oneness with daisies and squirrels and the driver beside me picking his nose, instead of that I analyze and scrutinize. I am often, it seems, one judgment away from reality. Lesson 312 says, I have no purpose today except to look upon a liberated world set free from all judgments I have made. As I liberate myself from my ridiculous blah, blah, blah judgments, I discover an all-absorbing, lustrous, and inexhaustible reality. So that's our Course in Miracles workbook lesson and the Pam Grout's commentary. And as usual, we've got about 50 minutes to have your comments or questions to soften and breathe into whatever is going on for you today, and give us a call and let's discuss it. What might we be able to do to support you in creating a more loving, peaceful, creative, gratitude-based existence? 563-999-3581. If you call that number and press 1, we can have a conversation. How can we support you today? What is on your mind? What was stirring for you this weekend that would benefit you to discuss or do a worksheet on? Or what is there about the worksheet process that still escapes you in terms of understanding how powerful it can be? Or what's the level of application of the worksheet process or the targeted journaling that Michael calls the Mind Shifter tool, or any other aspect of this work that we've talked about extensively for 10 and a half years now that you'd like to discuss? 563-999-3581 and press 1. Let us know what's going on for you today. Let us know how we can support you in creating a healthier, happier, more positive experience in your life. We have stepped through the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. We have talked about a whole host of books in the past 10 and a half years on Mind Shifters Radio. It's been a while since I've updated the page on mindshiftersacademy.org, but there is a page that simply talks about books we've discussed on the Mind Shifter Radio podcast. And these books, the top of the list reads The Empath Survival Guide, In an Unspoken Voice, How the Body Releases Trauma and Restores Goodness by Peter Levine. Judith Orloff wrote The Empath Survival Guide. We discussed in detail Welcoming the Unwelcome by Pema Chodron. We discussed in pretty much detail Healing Depression Without Medication by Dr. Jody Skilcorn. Several books by Pema Chodron, When Things Fall Apart, etc. We talked about Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker. Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. We've talked at length about The Way of Mastery and read some sections of that book, which I call the kinder, gentler version of the Course in Miracles. We've talked about a lot of different things over the past 10 and a half years. 365 Blessings to Heal Myself and the World by Pierre Pradervand, also by Pierre, The Gentle Art of Blessing. And we've talked about them as powerful tools for helping us create that more gentle, peaceful, loving, rewarding life. So what would you like to talk about today? Give us a call and make a suggestion. At least suggest a topic or a refresher course on one of the books I've listed. Taking Flight by Anthony DeMello is a book of story meditations, also by Anthony DeMello, the book Awareness, which finds its way into my rereading cycle every once or twice a year. We started a discussion about difficult conversations, and there's a book that was written from the I think it's a Harvard group, Harvard Negotiation Project, titled Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. And in its 10th anniversary edition, they updated it with answers to the 10 most frequently answered questions, or frequently asked questions about difficult conversations. And, if you're looking for kind of an outline, a plan for having a difficult conversation with somebody, and you're finding that doing reality management worksheets or targeted journaling from mind shifter perspective hasn't freed you up enough to have the conversation, this is a book you might enjoy, because they're looking at it from a kind of an analytical perspective, and they try to describe to you how to decipher the underlying structure of every difficult conversation, how to interpret the significance of what is said and what is not said, how to raise tough issues without triggering defensiveness, which is one of the most challenging things. And I would say something you don't have control over, so take a look at that section and read it lightly and then put it aside, because if I spend too much energy trying to construct what I'm saying in a way that it will not do this or that, or it will do this or that in terms of someone else's response, I'm wasting a lot of my energy, because I don't have control over other people's responses and emotions. And that's a fundamental observation in this work. I can control and am responsible for my own emotions and reactions, and I cannot control or be responsible for the emotions and reactions of anybody else, no matter how hard I try. In the book, they also want to help you learn how to manage strong emotions. And here again, they say, manage yours and manage theirs. And again, I would say it's not my job to manage somebody else's emotions. I don't have access to that. I don't have the power to control it. And all the energy I place on reaching that is potentially energy that's going to get me trapped and yield unproductive results. And then they say, and this is a point I would agree with, they teach you how to stay balanced regardless of how the other person responds. So, why we argue and why it doesn't help. One reason we argue is we think they are the problem, right? But it doesn't work because we are part of the interaction. And so we can think that it's not going to work and they're the problem because they're selfish or they're naive or they're controlling or they're irrational. But when we have any of those judgments, just like the Course in Miracles lesson today would say, when I hold those judgments, that's going to drive my perception. And I'm going to see all of the ways that they are selfish, they are naive, they are controlling, and they are irrational. And there's no doubt about why I keep arguing or they keep arguing. So it's critical to release judgment. It's critical to cancel goals for people to be different than they are. It's critical for me to cancel a goal for someone to be different than they are in order for me to have access to seeing them as they truly are. And when we don't want to argue, then we're not sure what to do, because we're seeing them in all of this negative judgment, and the arguing seems to unfold, incessantly, and we're not sure what to do. But that's why we feel so strongly about the situation in the first place. If arguing leads us nowhere, what else can we do but argue? Then there's the issue where they think we are the problem. Then there's the issue that we each make sense of our story of what happened, and we ask our mind to show us how we're right and they're wrong. And in the arguing, it literally blocks us from exploring the other person's side of the story. And whenever I'm arguing without completely understanding the other person's perspective, I never persuade them. And I'm never persuaded. They talk about how we each see the world from our unique perspective, just like the Course in Miracles lesson today is talking about how what I judge, what I want, literally creates my perception. And it creates a world for me to see that is as negative as the judgment that I made. They talk about one of the blocks to this process is that we each know ourselves better than anyone else can. And so on top of choosing different information than the person across the wall or across the table or across the desk from us, we each have access to different information, and we know about our hopes and dreams and our frustrations in ways they don't. Our different interpretations are experienced by how we each have past influences that are different and how we apply different rules about how the world should work and how it does work. And we have different perceptions because our conclusions, what we see, what the world looks like to us, is going to reflect our own self-interest. So, again, here's another technique, another system that says it's really important to move from certainty to curiosity. That's one of the first keys in the 15 commitments to conscious leadership. Is in the second commitment. I commit to growing in self-awareness. I commit to regarding every interaction as an opportunity to learn. And I commit to curiosity as a path to rapid learning. So here we are, how to have difficult conversations. One of the ways we move out of arguing is to choose to move from certainty, I know I'm right and they're wrong, I know what I know the facts, to curiosity. How can they think that? Instead of asking, how can they think that with the certainty that they're wrong and you're right, ask, I wonder what information they have that I don't have. Instead of asking, how can they be so irrational, ask myself, how might they see the world such that their view makes sense? And if I'm willing to start moving from certainty to curiosity, and if I'm willing to ask more actual wonder questions, I wonder what information they have that I don't. I wonder how they see the world in such a way that makes this perspective make sense to them. That's how I get access to their story. Another way is to question how did I get so certain about my perspective? I need to question, how did I come to the conclusions that I've reached? What are my data sources? And again, as we talk about so often in this work, any time I step into a process of thought, problem solving, etc., and I end up feeling a negative emotion, I could choose to use that as an alarm system to notify me that there's something in error about my thought process. And another important step in this is to adopt the and stance. So I'm right and they're right. There's a way in which I'm right and there's a way in which they're right. Again, here's a parallel to the 15 commitments of conscious leadership. I commit to understanding that the opposite of my story is as true or truer than my original story. And I recognize that I interpret the world around me, and I'm the one that gives my stories meaning. Here's another tool from the Harvard group on negotiations, Difficult Conversations book. Adapt the and stance. The and stance is based on the assumption that the world is complex and that you can feel hurt, angry, and wronged, and they can feel just as hurt, angry, and wronged. They can be doing their best, and you can think it's not good enough. You may have done something stupid, and they will have contributed in important ways to the problem just as well as you have. You can feel furious with them, and you can also feel love and appreciation for them. If you move into the and stance, it gives you a place from which to assert the full strength of your views and feelings without having to diminish the views and feelings of the other person. And you might be thinking that the advice to shift from certainty to arguing to curiosity, certainty and arguing, to curiosity and the and stance generally makes sense, but there must be exceptions, right? And so then they say, let's look at these two exceptions that aren't really exceptions. They seem like they are. What's the first exception? But I really am right. I really am right, except so can the other person be right at the same time I'm right. And then there's the idea of the exception of needing to give bad news. And what they say here is, when you have to give bad news, the and stance is probably the most powerful place to stand when engaging in a difficult conversation that requires you to deliver or enforce bad news. If you're breaking up with someone, it allows you to say, I'm breaking up with you because it's the right thing for me to do, and here's why, and I understand how hurt you might be by this, and that you think we might, we should try again, and I'm not changing my mind. It allows us to embrace and move around the wheel of perspective to see a variety of different ways to look at or analyze a situation. And flexibility and the need for seeing a situation from a variety of perspectives is one of the primary ways out of a difficult or into and through a difficult conversation, certainly out of an argument. So, what are your comments, questions? What are your thoughts about having difficult conversations with people, potentially the role of the reality management worksheet or the targeted journaling that Michael calls a mind shifter tool in that process? 563-999-3581. Call that number, press 1. We've got about 30 minutes left. How is this sitting with you? What are your thoughts about these conversations? What gets stirred up for you if you notice it when I start pointing out how much overlap there is from one deep, powerful system like the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership and the book on difficult conversations from the Harvard group on negotiating? How does it strike you to understand, to see so often, or do you find value, as I do, in looking for the similarities from one philosophy, one religion, one psychological perspective to another, rather than looking for and trying to argue for how one is right and the other is wrong? That's one of the perspectives that's given me such value over the years. When I learned to look for the similarities rather than scan for and then point out the differences. Most of the time when I'm scanning for and pointing out the differences from one philosophy or one religion or one psychological perspective or another, what I'm doing is looking for who's right and who's wrong. And this and perspective, this understanding that so many truths that I see as true have also their opposite being as true or truer than what I'm committed to seeing as the truth. That's one of the more amazing observations. I remember years ago when I was listening to an interview with a physicist, and the physicist said, one of the problems we have in the Western world is that we are so focused on proving who's right and who's wrong and seeing the world as this black and white world, when in truth, when in actuality, one of the hallmarks of any deep truth is that its opposite is also true. Let that sink in. How and for the Western mind, and I think most of the people that I'm addressing right now are from the Western mindset, that just seems ridiculous. So the physicist said, well, here's an example from my field of work. For years, people went around thumping their chests, proclaiming that they know the truth about light, that light is a particle. And then others would say, no, light is a wave. And it would go back and forth like this, with the arguing being a very popular topic, whether it was in the journal articles that were being quoted or the cocktail party conversations, and people arguing loudly for who's right and who's wrong. And then eventually what happened was they developed the technology to the point where they could actually track the fact that, guess what? Light sometimes acts as a particle, and light sometimes acts as a wave. And both are true. So when I say, well, this is just the way it is and it can't be any other way, for most of the things that have any significant consequence, that's probably not the whole picture. It's like the difference between what Newtonian physics observes and quantum physics observes. There are things in the quantum physics realm that blatantly contradict what people would say is an absolute indisputed fact from Newtonian physics. What might that be? Well, in Newtonian physics, it's common that people say opposites attract. And they say that for reasons like what happens when the north pole of a magnet is put near a south pole of a magnet, they attract. And if you put the north pole of a magnet near a north pole of a magnet, they repel each other. So opposites attract and likes repel. And that's something you can observe in the realm of Newtonian physics. Oddly, by the time you get down to the quantum level, the submolecular level, the opposite is true. And like attracts like. So what's the truth? Like attracts like, or opposites attract? Well, because it's a deep truth, people get to learn they're both true. They're both true. So, what's the thought about what you have thought is absolutely true and you've later discovered the opposite is also true? For most of us, the bulk of those situations are going to be where we thought we understood what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, whether it's for politics or religion or a relationship issue. And the more we stay open, the more we get curious, the more we're going to be shown that the opposite of what we thought was true is also true. That there are ways in which we can interact with the world that leave us in that opening, questioning space, and that's far more productive than deciding that we know what's right and we're right and the other person is wrong. It almost never ends well for us. So, 563-999-3581. What's a comment? What's a question about what we're discussing from Difficult Conversations, the Harvard negotiation project, or anything else that's on your mind for today. The Harvard negotiation project goes on to talk about if you're trying to get through a difficult conversation, it's really important to try and disentangle one from the other, intent from impact. When I have an intention and I make a statement, especially in a situation where someone might have a strong emotional response to the outcome of the discussion, it is really common for the impact of my words to be very different than my intention. And significant work needs to be done in most situations where an argument or a discussion is turned into an argument. A significant amount of work needs to be done to disentangle the intent from the impact. It says, here's an example of the story of Lori and Leo, and they've been in a relationship for 2 years, and they have a recurring fight, and the recurring fight is painful to both of them. And the couple was at a party thrown by some friends, and Lori was about to reach for another scoop of ice cream when Leo said, "Lori, why don't you lay off the ice cream?" Lori, who struggles with her weight, shot Leo a nasty look, and the two avoided each other for a while. Later that evening, things went from bad to worse. And Lori said, "I really resented it at the party, the way you treated me in front of our friends." And Leo said, "The way I treated you, what are you talking about?" And Lori said, "About the ice cream. You act like you're my father or something. You have this need to control me or put me down." And Leo said, "Lori, I wasn't trying to hurt you. You said you were on a diet. I'm just trying to help you stick to it. You're so defensive. You hear everything as an attack on you, even when I'm trying to help." And Lori says, "Help? Humiliating me in front of my friends is your idea of helping?" And Leo says, "You know, I just can't win with you. If I say something, you think I'm trying to humiliate you. And if I don't, you ask me why I let you overeat. I'm so sick of this. Sometimes I wonder whether you don't start these fights just on purpose." Now, most of us can relate to having been in a conversation similar to that. And they try to point out two key mistakes. Two crucial mistakes in this conversation make it infinitely more difficult than it needs to be. One mistake by Lori and one by Leo. And when Lori says, "You have this need to control me or put me down," she's talking about Leo's intentions. Not what he actually said, but what she believes he meant by it. Her mistake is to assume that she knows what Leo's intentions are, when the fact is she doesn't. And it's an easy and debilitating mistake to make. Most of us do it on a regular basis. Leo's mistake is to assume that once he clarifies that his intentions were good, Lori is no longer justified in being upset. He explains that he wasn't trying to hurt Lori, that in fact he was trying to help. And he's thinking, having explained this should be the end of the argument. As a result, he doesn't take time to learn what Lori's really feeling or why. And this mistake, too, is as common as it is crippling. Here's our first mistake. We make assumptions about intentions, and many times they are wrong. And the fundamental mechanism for us creating our assumption about intentions is the impact it has on us. But when we do that, we're ignorant of the fact. We are not paying attention to the fact that the other person doesn't really know the impact on us. We are the ones that create our own impact. This goes back to the talk we were having earlier about how each of us creates our own experience of life. And even in today's Course in Miracles lesson, if I have judgments, if I want the world to be different than it is, those judgments, those wantings, literally shape my perception in the moment. And it makes me see things that other people may not see because they're not really even there for other people. Right? If I'm creating my own perception and everyone I'm dealing with is creating their own perception, then the way they want things to be is creating what they see, and the way I want things to be is creating what I see. The judgments I make that this is bad or good, this is wrong or right, literally are the mechanism that create what I perceive, what I see, how the world looks through my eyes. And that's a core piece of today's Course in Miracles lesson. So on a regular basis, if I choose to see the world through someone else's eyes, or I choose to see the world the way the Holy Spirit would see it, I'm going to open up the possibilities for seeing more solutions. More clearly, I might see how what I said creates an impact on someone else. And that is a useful part of working through, moving through difficult conversations, getting curious, asking about the difference between what I intended and what the impact was. And when I'm convinced that the other person has a negative intention, and I assume they have a bad character, or I assume they had negative intentions, then it creates the likelihood that the other person will get defensive or will feel attacked. And the second mistake that I could make is I could assume that just because I had good intentions, there is no negative impact on the other person. And so I want to stay open to the fact that despite my positive intentions, someone could create a negative response to something I said. And the good news is avoiding these two mistakes is possible. So how to avoid the first mistake? You want to disentangle impact and intent. In this example, how can Lori avoid the mistake of attributing intentions to Leo that may not be there? Her first step is simply to recognize that there is a difference between the impact she creates and what Leo may have intended. Because she can't get anywhere without disentangling the two. So if I'm going to separate impact from intentions, it requires me to be aware of an automatic leap from the thought, I'm hurt, to you intended to hurt me. How do you stop doing that? You can make this distinction by asking yourself three questions. What did the other person actually say or do? What was the impact on me of this? And then my assumption, based on this impact, what assumption am I making about what the other person intended? If I'm willing to hold those three questions, I'm on the path to disentangling impact from intention. And to get there, I have to just say, okay, here's my thought. here's my guess. Here's the story I'm telling myself now. And that softens it and brings it to a space of ownership for me rather than stating it as a fact. I know they meant to hurt me. And then the next step is that I get to share the impact. And it might look like this. Lori might say, you know, when you said, why don't you lay off the ice cream, I felt hurt by that. And Leo would probably respond, you did? ? And Lori would say, yeah, I was just, really hurt by that comment. And Leo might say, well, I was just trying to help you stay off your diet. Why does that make you upset? And then Lori can talk about why she felt embarrassed and how it was in front of other people. And then Leo can talk about, well, I guess I didn't pay attention to that it might be embarrassing for you. So important keys are, don't pretend that you don't have a hypothesis. We are almost always making these guesses and projecting them onto others. And so it's really good to say, here's what's going on inside of me. Here's the story I'm telling myself now. Here's the impact on me based on the interpretation I made of what you said. And sharing that with the other person is the beginning of unraveling the impact from the intention. And then, as always, I want to catch defensiveness, because whenever I get defensiveness, I'm calling this resistance, tension, anger, frustration. Any of that is defensiveness. All of those are the negative emotions I talk about so often in this work as the alarm system, the evidence of my own internal alarm going off that's most usefully interpreted by me as evidence that my thoughts are off the mark. No matter what else is going on, if I move to defensiveness, if I move to a negative emotion, my thoughts are off the mark. The best use of my energy at that point in time is to take a step back, take a deep breath, turn the focus inside myself and ask myself, how am I creating this negative emotion? Another really good question for me to ask is, what am I making this situation that I'm currently in, what am I making this mean? If I'm following Diederik Wolzak's work, it might be really useful for me to say, okay, I'm acknowledging I'm upset. I'm acknowledging this is my creation. I'm going to ask myself, what's the name of the emotion I'm feeling? And then I'm going to ask myself, is this a familiar emotion? And Diederik says, it will always be a familiar emotion. And then the next step is asking, when is one of the first times I remember feeling this emotion in my life? And if and when a thought comes up about an earlier time, an earlier interaction with someone, and I pay attention to where I was, how old I was, who else was there, and what's happening, when I look at that situation from an earlier age, and I ask myself, what did I make that interaction, that situation, mean about me? I'm going to find that I downloaded a negative belief about myself. And I can step into the process of dismantling that negative belief, either with reality management worksheets and or EFT tapping and or the process that Diederik Wolzak himself outlines of saying over and over again that I forgive myself for believing this negative thing. I forgive myself for forgetting the positive about myself. And in that process, get very clear about what I was doing to create the upset that my mind was trying to tell me was created by someone or something outside of me. And that's the path to liberty. Guided by my own negative emotions, when I can step into closer and closer to being 100% responsible for the emotions and energies and beliefs about myself that I'm creating and or holding on to, I get closer to the liberty that I say I want. I get closer to the kindness, the appreciation, the love, the joy that, as Michael Rice would say, these are my birthright. And that's what we're here to support people in doing. So, we've got maybe 5 or 6 minutes left. How is this landing for you? 563-999-3581. Call that number and press 1 and let us know if this is making any sense, if this is useful, what you'd like to have as a topic for a future day this week. Comments, questions, answers, even soliloquies. We've got 5 minutes left. There's plenty of time for a soliloquy. I suppose I should look that word up and make sure it's an appropriate use of that word. In that offering, what's on your mind? We have 4 or 5 people in the calling queue, no one in the chat room right now. I should mention that we have a support group coming up this week, Tuesday and Thursday from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central, as we do most weeks. You can find out about that on mindshiftersacademy.org website. And it's free to join. You can either join us yourself or pass that information along to someone you think might be interested. Again, that'll be tomorrow, Tuesday, and Thursday, 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central Time. So, what's on your mind? How can we support you? I had somebody in the office earlier today making some significant progress on identifying that negative emotional state as the prompt for doing some work, internal work. And here's a person who absolutely knows that she doesn't want to move backwards in a situation, in a relationship. And yet, she keeps watching herself do things that keep her stuck in the current status and prevent her from moving forward. And so we're asking her to step into this level of observation, just like what we're talking about today. How am I creating this experience for myself? What am I making the situation mean? And until she's able to ask that often enough and listen with openness to the response, she's going to stay stuck, because we do things for a reason. Right? This is one of the things we observe over and over again. That's why the 10 bottom line observations, the first one is the hardest one right up front. The first observation is, if whatever I'm doing is not working, I should feel free to try something else. And yet, trying something else, breaking the pattern of doing what's not working, is one of the hardest things we'll ever encounter. And the reason for that is because, not because we're sick or crazy or stupid or lazy, but because whether it's at a conscious level or an unconscious level, we have reasons for doing whatever we do. And when we have a reason for doing something, it makes it almost impossible to break out of the cycle of going against our really good reasons. So, yeah, most people say right off the bat, oh, my gosh, that's ridiculously simple. I don't know why you would even have that as a list. Of course, if what you're doing isn't working, you should feel free to try something else. And yet, most of those people wake up and realize at one point or another in their lives, it's really hard to quit doing what they've been doing that isn't working. And the reason is because I'm not sick, I'm not crazy, I'm not stupid, I'm not lazy, and I'm not masochistic. I do not enjoy the pain. And if that's true, what it means is I have really good reasons for doing it, even if it didn't work the last 17 times I did it. When it rolls around in my mind the next time, something about it, my desire to avoid something or my desire to hold on to something, will drive my perception. Like the Course in Miracles says, you must come to understand the distorting power of how you want things to be. Because if you don't come to understand that distorting power, that power will distort your perception, and your perception will drive your view of the world, and your view of the world drives your behaviors. And that's, the long and short of how we get stuck in cycles of doing things that are not productive. So hopefully this has been of some use to you. This is the end of our Monday show for the first hour. Michael and Jeannie should be here for the second hour. I'll remind us all that we are coming from love. We are made of this stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Welcome, Jeannie Rice.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. I hope you had a good weekend.
I did indeed. I hope the same for you, and have a great show.
Thank you. Thanks.